Hello, everybody. Hannah here again with the Joseph Palumbo Center. We're here for another interview. Today, I'll be interviewing Amy Groessl, who is a member of the advisory board at JPC and also my direct supervisor as an intern. Yeah. So we're just going to talk kind of about how you got into the social work field and then whatever comes after that. So yeah, my first question is, what drew you to social work?
Sure. Well, I think it started back when I was in my 20s. I was actually in a different field of study. I was actually studying to be a pilot. So I was in an aviation technology program and in my early 20s and felt like I loved the flying, but the school part was a little bit off for me. So I took a semester off of school and volunteered at a crisis hotline, went through a training, and I just loved it. So eventually I ended up getting a bachelor's in social work, and then I got my master's in social work at Jane Addams. And then in 2018, I graduated with a PhD in clinical social work from the Institute for Clinical Social Work. So it's been a part of my life for a long time, but definitely the right fit for me.
Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of your career as a social worker, what were you doing? What jobs did you have?
My very first job was actually when I was getting my bachelor's degree, finishing up my bachelor's degree, but in social work. I worked at the National Runaway Switchboard, which was a hotline for youth and who were either having a crisis at home or had run away from home or needed crisis intervention to help find housing and things like that. But after I graduated, I shifted into community mental health, and I did that for a number of years, and I loved it. I worked with Community Mental Health Council in Chicago, met some amazing people who mentored me and taught me a lot about what I do today and what I know today. And in that position, I worked with an attorney general grant funded position. I was a victim assistance specialist. So I did direct service and court advocacy with individuals who had been impacted by violent crime.
Mm.
So it was pretty intense, and I learned a lot about trauma at that time. But that definitely shaped the direction that I, kept going in as far as trauma work and working with individuals of all ages, kids all the way up to elders. So I've really enjoyed that.
Mhm.
And I was there for about 8 years. I think I was there for about 8 years. Did a number of different positions, got my master's degree when I was there. They were really flexible, and I was able to go to school full time and still work, which was
Mm.
helpful.
Mhm.
And that kind of led the way to my second agency job after that, which was with Children's Research Triangle in Chicago. And I was there for a lot of years. I think 2004 until, 2016. And I started as the therapy coordinator at that agency and then ended up as the therapy director. And Children's Research Triangle is a kind of a small not-for-profit behavioral, it's kind of known as a clinic that works with kids with complex histories and their families. So there's a lot of the kids and families that come through the program have been impacted by adoption or adoption related issues. The clinic specializes in psychological evaluations, and I kind of oversaw the therapy team and the
Mhm.
therapists. And we had lots of interns, grew into a pretty big therapy program. We were based in the communities and schools, domestic violence shelters, worked with the social, worked with, can you edit this? Or is this
I can, yeah. But
okay?
also, it's meant to be a conversation. So
Okay.
if things get a little,
You're right. Okay, so that's okay. Anyways, what I meant to say is part of the work that we were doing also was with the Department of Children and Family Services organization. So we were working with kids in that system as well as birth parents, bio parents, and foster parents.
Mhm.
So just really, my work has been with, I guess, just a really broad range of folks and, through the years and with kids, but I really love doing therapy. And
Mhm.
so since I've been at CRT for about the past 4 or 5 years, I've been in private practice, which is about a half time of my schedule. And I
Mhm.
still primarily work with people who have history of early trauma or current trauma, relationship issues, things like that. And I teach a
Mhm.
couple classes.
At
Um,
ICSW, right?
yeah, I teach. Right now, I'm teaching perspectives on trauma and neuroscience, which is actually one of Joe Palumbo's kind of a class that took over from a lot of his work
Mhm.
that was developed after he had taught it. I took it from him years ago as far as an elective, but now it's actually a course that's offered for the first year PhD students, thankfully, because I think it's really important.
Mhm.
And then I teach research methods to second year PhD students. So that's a lot of focus on qualitative research and the different methodologies and mixed methods and some quantitative as well. So all of the things I love.
What made you want to get a PhD after getting your master's?
Great question. So it was a whole different reason of why I ended up. So I ended up getting it, and it turned out to be for the reasons I didn't realize why, that I would get it for. But when I was working at Children's Research Triangle, we were funding. We were had a very diverse funding source. So a lot of those funding sources were federal grants. And I would be able to be like a project coordinator on those grants, but because I didn't have a doctorate degree, I could never be the principal investigator, or I wasn't able to be for a lot of the things that I felt really passionate about. And that felt like I kept, kind of, I was able to work and run the grants in certain ways. And um, I mean, it was all very team-based work, but there was just this feeling that I wanted to be able to do more. I wanted to be a principal investigator, to oversee and to be named as the principal investigator. And I mean, it was a little thing, but it turned out to be something that drove me to pursue getting a PhD because I wanted to do more research. But what ultimately ended up happening, I think, as I got into ICSW's program, is I recognized how much of psychodynamic work was already a part of my foundation, and that being a part of that institute really broadened my sense of psychodynamic work and relational work, but also really got me into loving qualitative research too.
Mhm.
So new surprises that came along. But the original reason was because felt like I was not able to do all that I wanted to do in my organization. Not because they wouldn't allow me. It was more around what was allowed, or you know with federal grants, there was certain levels. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. My next question is, obviously we know how you're a lot involved with ICSW and how you got there, but what about JPC specifically?
Well, I had Joe Palumbo for my epistemology 1 class back about, gosh, 9 years ago. And I just loved the class a lot. I loved the way he taught. I felt he started, obviously, he has a lot of knowledge around psychodynamic theory, especially self psychology. But he started to talk about systems work and neuroscience. And I just kind of had already been very interested in that. And then when he offered an elective in neuroscience, I took it right away. It was kind of a class that was just offered, and I was able to use that as one of my electives. And it was then that I really felt connected with the work he was doing. And he actually became a part of my advisory committee for my dissertation, for my study. And his background in working with youth who have neurocognitive disorders, deficits, challenges, really tied into my research. And So I got a lot of feedback and advisory hours from him for that process. And then I think there was just a conversation one time that, would you like to come on to the committee? And of course I was like, yeah, right away. So I've been on it for about 4 years now, maybe 5 years.
Mhm.
But yeah, I feel right at home there and the work that they're doing. And I presented a few times for the conferences and I really
Mhm.
enjoy that. So yeah, that was how I got connected.
Nice. Yeah. So with JPC specifically, like, what do you see like our place in the field? Like, what do you think? Both, what are we doing already, and like, how are you connected to that? And then also, like, in the future, what do you foresee us being able to do and add to the fields?
Yeah, good question. I think that, so historically, I think that the Joe Palumbo Center really focused on an annual conference that was a kind of an all-day training opportunity and in person. And it was, they were wonderful events with wonderful, great speakers in the field, and then usually breakout workshops in the afternoon. But then with the shift because of the pandemic, everything had to kind of go online. And I think that bringing you on board too has brought opportunities to kind of continue to provide outreach to people that are clinicians in the field, or just people that want to learn more about psychodynamic studies as it relates to neuroscience. And I just think that there's more of an opportunity now to continue to reach people in different ways, not just one conference per year, but hopefully smaller educational opportunities to just kind of give a 101, what is cognitive neuroscience? What is neuropsychology? How can understanding the brain and our nervous system help us in our direct service when we're working with people? Like, it's also interconnected. So I do feel like that's how things are feeling now, that we're kind of shifting into hopefully branching out more, connecting with more agencies, and really being a place where people can just learn more about the work, this kind of work.
Yeah, where do you see, kind of the work with neuroscience and the work more generally that JPC is doing? Where do you see that showing up in like your day-to-day sessions with clients?
Well, I use it a lot. I mean, and I'm, foundationally, I'm very, I'm psychodynamic relational, but I think that even a lot of people I do work with have a history of trauma or anxiety, sometimes depression, sometimes a lot of family system stuff, intergenerational. I'm very curious about epigenetics, but I think it's like, how do we holistically understand a person and how they're functioning, not only psychologically or emotionally, but then also the nervous system that's at play. And I feel like once people have an understanding that their nervous system is activated by certain events, certain individuals, certain environments, and they know that that's an autonomic reaction, that it takes away a lot of self-blame, that your nervous system is kicking on and activating in a protective way. It's about safety and being kept safe, and creating an alarm state. So the work is educating around that, but also combining, what's, with the depth psychotherapy. It's like, what are some of the root causes to this? Let's look way back at even pre-verbal time. What were things potentially like when you were an infant and a toddler? How did you connect and attach to your caregivers, and how did that impact how your brain developed and how you relate to people today? So it's all so interconnected. So I think the more we understand how things work, why they work, why we have stress hormones, why we have the more, the helpful hormones and transmitters that help us to feel better, like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin.
Mhm.
how can we understand that? I think if we understand it more, that can help individuals move forward. It's just also interconnected.
Mhm.
So as a clinician, I use it a lot. I do. Yeah.
Yeah, to take a little bit of a step back more generally, to kind of the social work field in general, I guess kind of two questions you could take either ways. What kind of changes in the field are you seeing, and then that you're excited about, and then what are some criticisms you have for the field of social work or therapy more specifically, whichever.
Mm. I think the thing that's drawn me into, I think the thing that drew me into the field of social work in the beginning, and what still keeps me connected, and really engaged and really kind of proud of this, um, this career, and actually, well, just this organization of being a social worker is, the strong sense of person and environment and social justice, and just really like, meeting people where they are, and but also, being an advocate, being a voice, helping people to find their voices. I think it's just there's just such a real foundational element that of social work, that where we become, kind of a part of somebody's growth, hopefully in a way that's meaningful and authentic, and also strength based. I think that's
Mhm.
another thing that, social work kind of in general has always to me felt strength based. It's like not what's wrong with you, but what's going on with you, what's happened to you, and also what are the strengths that you have within you to help, you to overcome things that may be challenging, so that feels like it's kind of the part that kind of the overarching parts of social work that I feel really good about, that feel aligned with my own values, as an individual.
Mhm.
Um, I think that the field of social work it can be a generalist practice, which I think is good, because I think a lot of people can get an MSW, or a different, whatever level degree, and it translates into a lot of different fields. I think that what I don't know if it's a criticism or not, but I think that I I worry sometimes and maybe this is a more of a systemic kind of issue. I mean, one of the things about being in the field and being in big agencies and systems is that there's a lot of guidelines around, or rules, maybe I should say, and bureaucracy around what needs to be done in order to do services. Like, I sometimes feel like it would be so much more beneficial if the client could come first no matter what, and
Mm.
that's the focus. And I think sometimes, and I don't know if that's the fields, I think that's a more systemic funding issue as well.
Mhm.
But I guess that's probably an area that, I feel like can become problematic, and the secondary stress that occurs when you're working in the field is very problematic. There's a high burnout rate,
Mhm.
and maybe that's another side that I feel like, there needs to be in every organization where people are working with people. There needs to be a focus on the caregivers, the providers, and their own, and how they hold trauma, how they hold the stories that they hear, and that it's understandable that you get stressed out as a caregiver, as a clinician, as a provider. So that's another area. I think I wish there was more focus on the mental health, and the emotional health, and the overall health of providers, that
Mhm.
there was more support. Yeah.
What do you think that would look like, or what does it already look like in agencies or places where they do like mental health care for their employees well?
Yeah. I can give an example. One of the things that a shift that we when I was at Children's Research Triangle, we were part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. We were a community provider for that overarching network. And throughout the years that we were working with them, as grant, we had a grant from SAMHSA through the network, and we were providing services into the community for youth and adults that had complex trauma. But one of the things that the NCTSN shifted in is really looking at secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, burnout, and things like that. And how do you shift your organization to be trauma informed so that it's also trauma informed for your providers?
Mm-hmm.
And so we actually shifted and were able to do education around trauma to everybody that worked there, IT, the receptionist, anyone that wasn't even doing direct services, that we were all kind of on the same page with what does this mean? Not only because we wanted to provide a environment that was, a safe space for clients and families, but also what we did is we shifted into one day or one half day a week where it was a time where we would get together as clinicians or providers and do reflective supervision. Everybody was matched with a peer to do supervision, to talk about tough cases. People that were supervising, there was kind of an open door policy. We just were very cognizant of, you do this work, you hold a lot, and what's it like for you? And really, suggesting that people take their PTO and take time off and really have a work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's just acknowledging it. And there are some systems where two of my colleagues did some wonderful trainings at the Guardian Ad Litem's office, and they did a whole year, maybe 2 years actually, with the Guardian Ad Litem's office, with these attorneys that are working with children in the child welfare system. And attorneys in general don't typically have a space to talk about what it's like to have the intensity of the work that they're doing, how it impacts them. So that was a big shift for that organization, and that they started to address their own secondary trauma, and if they're healthier in themselves and understanding how the work impacts their health and mental health, then they're going to be able to feel more balanced and connected at work.
Mm-hmm.
But it's systemic, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that kind of discussion leads me pretty good segue into my next question, which is, what advice do you have for new social workers?
I just love that question. I think because I have a lot of different things to mention, but one is, I think that the thing that comes to my mind was my own experience when I had my first client. And I don't know if I've told you this story, Hannah, but he was 4 years old. And I was like thinking, as I had learned about therapy and I had been, trying to understand, I didn't have much of a background at all. And so I was kind of going into it, but I was like, what do I do? What do I say? The books tell me to do this, and I've been taught to do that. And my supervisor was like, just develop the relationship, be in the space with him, follow his lead, do non-directed play. And, it felt like, so I think it's like, so taking that, I think it's something I've taken into every person that I've worked with. Now, if you're a new social worker working with individuals in counseling or therapy, then my advice is just to be relational and develop a trusting space and be authentic, and to be, to really listen, especially in the beginning. And it's the different interventions, the different methods like psychodynamic psychotherapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT, and all of the different things we may learn as therapists. What's foundational is that has to be a safe space, and a relationship has to be there in order for change to occur, in order for these other all of these types of interventions, I think, to work. So I think it's just meeting them where they're at, no matter whatever the work is that you're doing as a new therapist or a new social worker. And also finding peers and connections, hopefully finding a colleague or colleagues that you can really connect with, but also if you have a supervisor that is not somebody that you feel connected to, then seek somebody out.
Mhm.
Sometimes there can be supervisors are usually pretty busy in agencies, so they're stretched. So sometimes you may need to do administrative and clinical supervision with them, but find another person to really connect with and to be more reflective.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of being proactive, but not being afraid to ask, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's my list of questions. Is there anything else that you want to say or any other kind of things?
I don't think so. I mean, it's been kind of a little walk down memory lane here. I hope that I would encourage anybody that has, questions about either the Joe Palumbo Center or ICSW or social work in general. One of the things that I always want to be open to is I talk to a lot of people that are considering going into getting a master's degree in social work or different fields. Just I'm happy to kind of be somebody that answers questions. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of people in the field are. So I think if you're curious about different fields or different areas of study in the field, that I don't know, most social workers are pretty approachable. I think that
Mm-hmm. You'd hope so, yeah,
yeah,
considering the field we're in.
yeah. So I think that's it's one of our strengths, I suppose, I hope, with all of us. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're curious and want to know more, just reach out. So
Cool. Yeah, so I think that's the end of our interview. To our dear audience, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Amy, for
thank you,
doing
Hannah.
this little interview with me. But I will see you, audience, soon enough in our next content. Thank you so much. All right.